He saw the boy before he heard the shout. Small frame, clenched jaw, hands shaking from something he shouldn't have faced alone. The biker watched from the edge of the parking lot, engine ticking, the scent of rain hanging low. The boy wasn't running for help. He was running because he had run out of options. Behind him, a woman tried to steady herself, one hand gripping her ribs, the other clutching a worn grocery receipt that fluttered in the wind like a warning. No one else noticed. No one else cared. But the biker saw the bruise along her cheek, the split in her lip, the quiet apology in her eyes as if she believed she deserved the hurt. The boy reached him, breathless, looking up like someone who finally found the last door in a burning hallway. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He just said the words soft and broken, the kind that don't leave a kid unless he has watched a man cross a line over and over. The biker didn't nod, didn't speak. He just recognized the weight. Predators wore many faces in towns like this, and this one had been allowed to roam too long. In the reflection of the diner's window, he saw the man stepping out, shoulders wide, temper louder than his footsteps. People lowered their heads. The boy flinched. The biker felt the old code lock into place like a bolt sliding home. There were moments you were chosen, not asked, and this one didn't feel like a choice at all. Follow this account so you don't miss the Guardian's stories. He pushed open the diner door without a sound, letting the warmth brush against the cold riding off his jacket. The place smelled of burnt coffee and fryer oil, the kind that settles into walls after years of night shifts and tired workers. The woman stood near the counter, shoulders curled in, like she was trying to shrink out of her own life. She wiped at her mouth with the back of her hand, pretending it didn't hurt. The boy stayed close to the biker's side, not touching him, just standing inside his shadow, like it was the first safe place he'd found in months. The waitress glanced over, eyes flicking from the bruised woman to the man stomping in behind her. She didn't say a word. It wasn't fear. It was the kind of resignation you see when people have learned the police won't come fast, and when they do, they call it a family matter. The biker noticed the woman's other hand gripping that crumpled grocery receipt. Not groceries. He read the print upside down. Pharmacy. Painkillers. A prescription she couldn't afford to fill. A silent revelation tucked inside cheap thermal paper. The man stormed further in, shouting about being embarrassed, about the boy making him look weak. His voice carried the stale edge of someone who believed he owned everything his anger touched. The woman didn't push back. She just stood there, bracing like someone who had practiced it. The biker's jaw tightened once, almost imperceptibly. The boy's breath hitched. The man raised his hand, just enough to remind her he could. The biker stepped forward, slow and steady. He didn't posture, didn't warn. He simply placed himself between them, the kind of move that only makes sense to someone who's lived long enough to stop fearing consequences. The man blinked, surprised, then smirked like he'd found another target to bully. The biker didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the woman, on that trembling hand, and that useless receipt hanging from her fingers. It was enough to tell him everything. Outside, engines rolled faintly in the distance, like a low growl carried on the cold air. Not a threat, not yet. Just the world shifting because one man had stepped out of line, and another had finally noticed. The man tried to walk around him, puffing his chest, muttering about minding your own business. The biker didn't move. He stood planted, boots steady on the dull tile, like the whole place had settled around him. The woman lowered her gaze, as if bracing for the explosion she thought would follow. The boy kept close, silent, but the biker could feel the kid's fear in the way his shoulders tightened each time the man exhaled too loudly. A few customers shifted in their seats. None stepped in. They weren't cruel. They were tired. Tired of scenes like this, tired of being the ones who got punished for doing the right thing. Towns like this taught people to look away. The biker never learned that lesson. The man leaned in, breath thick with cheap liquor, insisting he had a right to talk to his family. The biker's eyes dropped to the woman's hand again. She wasn't holding the receipt anymore. She'd tucked it into her palm like she was trying to hide evidence of her own suffering. The edge still stuck out between her fingers, shaking just enough to catch the biker's attention. Painkillers, denied at the counter. Price circled in red ink. A silent admission that the hurt wasn't new. He recognized the kind of bruise blooming along her arm, not from a single mistake, from repetition, from someone who apologized only when they feared consequence, not remorse. The man kept talking, louder now, testing boundaries. The biker didn't answer. He only angled his body enough that the woman could step behind him if she chose. She didn't. Not yet. People trapped long enough sometimes forget they're allowed to move. The waitress approached with a pot of coffee, not to serve but to break the tension. Her voice trembled as she set the pot down, pretending to wipe the counter. The biker noticed an old bruise near her wrist too, faded yellow. This town didn't just tolerate men like the one in front of him, it produced them. The door behind them chimed. Cold air rushed in. The man froze for a fraction of a second. The biker didn't turn, but he felt the shift in the room. Two figures stepped inside, quiet, heavy, purposeful. They wore the road on their jackets and silence on their faces. Not summoned, not signaled. Just drawn by the change in the wind, the kind that tells brothers something isn't right. The man's bravado faltered. Only a crack. But cracks widen fast under the right pressure. He swallowed hard, trying to keep control of the moment, trying to pretend he wasn't afraid of men who didn't need to raise their voices to be understood. The biker still didn't look at him. He just watched the woman. Her free hand rested lightly on the boy's shoulder, guiding him behind her, as if she suddenly remembered he was only a child. The boy peeked out at the biker, eyes filled with a question he didn't know how to ask. Not for rescue, for permission to believe things could change. The biker lowered his chin once, slow, deliberate. Not a promise, a recognition. The man snapped back, louder than before, claiming strangers didn't get to interfere. He swung his arm toward the woman, not a hit, just enough to show he could. The biker shifted half a step, blocking the path again. Something in his stillness made the man take a step back. Predators sense when the food chain rearranges itself. The two bikers behind him spread out naturally. Not a formation, just presence. The waitress backed away. The boy straightened a little, like the weight on his chest had loosened. The woman exhaled shakily, fingers brushing the receipt again, that small piece of paper holding every unspoken truth she had been carrying. The biker finally spoke, voice low, steady, almost quiet enough to miss. He told the man to leave, not shouted, not asked, stated. The man barked a laugh, but the sound wavered, thin and uncertain. He glanced around, realizing no one in the diner was on his side, not even the silence. He stepped back toward the door, muttering that he'd be waiting outside. A threat dressed as a retreat. The biker didn't follow. He just watched the woman anchor herself against a counter, gripping the edge like she didn't trust her legs yet. Outside, the man paced near his truck. The biker saw him through the window. He wasn't leaving. He was calculating. Men like him always came back when they thought the world wasn't looking. The woman finally spoke, barely audible. She apologized, not for the man, for causing trouble. She said it like she'd said it 1,000 times, like her survival depended on staying small. The biker didn't respond. He just turned slightly, giving her space to breathe, letting her understand that nothing happening tonight was her fault. The boy tugged at her sleeve, whispering something that made her eyes fill without spilling. She hugged him close, hiding the bruise on her ribs with her arm. The biker caught a glimpse of a small photograph tucked into her wallet when she shifted. A man in uniform, younger, smiling. Her brother, maybe. Someone who should have protected them but wasn't here anymore. Another silent revelation slipping into the narrative of her life. The engines outside grew louder. More arriving. Slow. Controlled. Not a threat to her. Not a threat to the boy. Just the sort of quiet reinforcement that comes when a line has been crossed and the road decides to answer. The biker walked to the window, not to stare the man down, but to see the pattern forming outside. The truck idled crooked in its parking spot, lights still on, door still open. The man paced with a jittery swagger, pretending he wasn't shaken. His breath steamed in the cold air, rising in uneven bursts. He kept checking the diner door, waiting for the biker to come out so he could reclaim the power he thought he'd lost. But he wasn't alone anymore. 3 more bikes rolled in slow, their headlights cutting low beams through the mist. They didn't accelerate. They didn't rev. They coasted in like they'd been following the tension on the wind. Inside, The woman tried to steady her hands, but each tremor betrayed the truth. The waitress poured her a cup of water without asking. The biker noticed the way the woman whispered thank you, like the words themselves were fragile. The boy kept glancing at the door, then up at the biker, then back at his mother. He wasn't scared of the bikers. He was scared of what happened when the man outside decided he had something to prove. One of the newly arrived bikers stepped off his bike, a tall figure with a calm expression and hands that had worked steel for decades. He scanned the parking lot with the quiet awareness of someone who had no interest in escalating anything, unless escalation became necessary. The man outside stiffened when he saw him, then stiffened again as two more riders joined, their jackets heavy with miles and old storms. The biker inside didn't move from his position. He just watched through the glass, reading the man's body language as easily as the faded ink on his knuckles. The man wasn't planning to leave. He was gathering nerve, the kind fueled by wounded pride and bad decisions. He kept glancing at the diner door, the way a cornered animal watches an exit. The woman shifted her weight, wincing when her side flared with pain. The biker caught the movement, then glanced again at the receipt still trapped between her fingers. He knew that kind of pain. Not the bruise, but the cost. The cost of staying. The cost of leaving. The cost of pretending a man like that could change. The boy finally spoke, voice soft, barely more than a breath. He told the biker that the man outside wasn't his father. The woman closed her eyes, a tear slipping free before she wiped it away, hoping no one saw. But the biker did, and that truth settled into place with a clarity that didn't need explanation. A truck rolled into the lot across the street, slowing when its driver noticed the cluster of bikes. Not curious, just cautious. People around here knew the difference between chaos and order, and the quiet presence of bikers usually meant the latter. The man outside kicked at the gravel, muttering, then squared his shoulders as if trying to rebuild the bravado that had cracked inside the diner. He pulled something from his truck, not a weapon, just his jacket. But he threw it on like armor, like a statement that he wasn't done. Inside, the biker moved toward the door. Not fast, not dramatic, just deliberate. The woman flinched as if she expected violence to follow him. But the boy stepped forward, grabbing the biker's sleeve for a moment, holding on like he wasn't ready for the world outside to swallow them again. The biker didn't shake him off. He simply waited until the boy's hand fell away on its own, replaced by something steadier in his eyes. The waitress whispered that she could call the police. The biker didn't answer, but the slight downturn of his brow was enough. They all knew the response time here. They all knew how often situations like this were brushed aside as misunderstandings. The receipts, the bruises, the shaking hands, none of that reached the reports. He stepped outside. The cold hit him first. Then the man's voice, louder than necessary. He accused the biker of interfering in his family. He claimed the woman was exaggerating. He said the boy needed discipline. All the classic defenses of a man who had built his identity on controlling others. But the wind carried the low rumble of more engines. 2 additional bikes pulled in, quiet as shadows, forming a loose perimeter that wasn't aggressive, just undeniable. The man looked around, realization sinking in that the story he told himself about being the biggest presence in the town had just been rewritten. The biker didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He didn't posture. He simply told the man he wasn't stepping foot back inside. The tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of something final. The man barked out a laugh, a sharp, desperate sound. He said he wasn't afraid of a gang. The tallest biker, the one who'd arrived first, tilted his head slightly, almost sympathetic. Not because he felt pity, because he'd heard lines like that before, usually from men who didn't understand how small they'd become. The man stepped forward, fist curling. He didn't swing. Cowards rarely do without certainty. But he leaned in, close enough that the biker could smell the residue of cheap whiskey and old adrenaline. He spat out another threat, one meant to reclaim control. The biker didn't move. He just watched, eyes steady, breathing slow. And something in that stillness undid the man more than any physical response would have. The man stepped back, shaking his hand out like it had cramped. The woman watched through the diner window, fingers pressed against the glass. The boy stood beside her, breath fogging the pain, eyes wide but unafraid now. The receipt lay discarded on the counter behind them, edges curled, truth exposed. One of the bikers approached the man's truck, not touching it, just standing near enough to make a point. Another leaned against a lamppost, arms crossed, posture relaxed but ready. The road didn't come to fight. It came to remind. The man finally pointed at the biker, voice cracking as he promised he'd be back, that this wasn't over. But even he didn't believe it. His steps faltered. His words stumbled. His hand shook when he opened the truck door. He drove off too fast, tires spinning, fear disguised as fury. The biker didn't watch the truck disappear. He was already turning back toward the diner, toward the quiet aftermath that mattered more than the man's retreat. The diner settled into a strange hush as he stepped back inside, the kind that follows storms that didn't quite break. The woman stood near the counter, arms wrapped around herself, as if holding in everything that had been threatening to spill out for far too long. The boy hovered at her side, protective in a way no child should have to be. The waitress pretended to wipe down a clean spot on the counter, trying to give them privacy without stepping away completely. The biker stopped a few feet from them, not close enough to overwhelm, not distant enough to ignore their fear. The woman lifted her eyes, and for the first time, he saw the exhaustion beneath the bruises, years of shrinking, of explaining away pain, of pretending the world was safer than it was. She didn't thank him. She didn't apologize. She just breathed, slow and uneven, as if testing the air for danger. The boy stepped forward, holding out something he'd kept hidden in his fist. A small object, warm from his grip. The biker took it without comment. It was a keychain, faded plastic shaped like a lighthouse, cracked along one side, the same lighthouse printed faintly on the folded photograph tucked in her wallet. A silent revelation. The woman whispered that it belonged to her brother. The boy said his uncle used to take him to see the real lighthouse when things got bad at home. The biker nodded once, understanding more in that moment than words could carry. Outside, the bikes remained still, engines cut but presence firm. They waited for a sign, for a shift in danger, for the moment when silence changed from watchful to safe. The tall biker stepped closer to the window, checking the street with practiced ease, then glanced inside, catching the biker's eye. No signal passed between them, but the message was clear. The truck hadn't returned. The man hadn't circled around. The night was holding steady. The woman touched her ribs gently, flinching when her fingers pressed too close to the bruise. She tried to straighten her posture, tried to look as though she still had control of her own body. The biker noticed how the boy positioned himself, so she didn't have to bend to hide the pain. That small act said everything about the life they lived. The waitress approached with a paper bag filled with ice, wrapped in a thin towel. She offered it without fuss. The woman accepted it with trembling hands, murmuring a soft thanks. The boy insisted on holding it for her, lifting it carefully to her cheek. She closed her eyes, as the cold numbed the swelling. The biker set the lighthouse keychain on the counter, placing it gently so she knew he understood its meaning. The woman looked at it, then at him, confusion mixing with something like relief. He didn't tell her she needed to leave the man. He didn't tell her she needed to be stronger. Moral commands from strangers rarely help, but he gave her the one thing she hadn't had in a long time, a moment where she wasn't alone. A few minutes passed. The wind outside shifted, quieter now, carrying the faint scent of wet asphalt. One of the bikers stepped in and nodded once, the kind of nod that meant the perimeter was clear, the road quiet, the threat moved on. The woman looked toward the door, fear flickering again, the kind that lives in people who know peace can be temporary. The biker stepped aside slightly, giving her a path out, but also making sure she understood she didn't have to walk it alone. She hesitated, then asked if he thought the man would come back. He didn't lie. He said, men like that often try. But he added something else, something steadier. That tonight the road had seen her, that people who witnessed truth couldn't unsee it. She didn't fully understand, but her shoulders loosened a fraction. The boy reached for her hand, gripping it tighter than before. She held him close, whispering that they would go somewhere safe for the night. Maybe her sister's place. Maybe anywhere but home. The biker nodded once, letting her choose her own direction. The tall biker opened the diner door for them. No theatrics, no words, just a quiet escort into the night. The woman stepped through first, then the boy, both moving carefully, as if the air outside might still shatter around them. But nothing happened. The lot remained still. The street empty, the truck long gone. She turned back for a moment, looking at the biker with an expression that wasn't gratitude, wasn't relief, just recognition. A shared understanding that something had shifted in her life, even if she didn't yet know how far the change would reach. She whispered goodbye. The boy lifted his hand in a small wave. They climbed into a rideshare the waitress had called without asking. The driver looked confused but didn't question it. He just nodded and drove them away. The biker watched until the taillights disappeared beyond the curve. Behind him, the engines began to stir again, low rumbles that signaled the night was ready to move on. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. The road had one more task before it released its grip on the moment. The biker didn't speak as he stepped back outside. The air had cooled further. The kind of cold that made sound travel sharper across empty streets. The other riders waited in a loose semicircle, quiet and alert. They weren't there to intimidate. They were there because one of their own had marked the situation as unfinished. The man's truck appeared again before the biker even reached his bike, headlights off, engine low, rolling slow along the far edge of the lot, like he thought he could rewrite the outcome by sneaking back in. Some men return not out of courage, but out of the refusal to accept that they've already lost. He stopped near the curb, door creaking open. His voice came first, slurred and uneven, shouting that the woman was lying, that the boy was confused, that strangers had no right to interfere. He tried to sound angry, but the cracks showed through. His eyes flicked from face to face, searching for someone to dominate. No one gave him that opportunity. The biker didn't walk toward him. He simply stood where he was, hands relaxed at his sides, expression unreadable. The man stumbled forward, insisting he wasn't scared, insisting he'd take the woman home whether anyone liked it or not. He rambled about being a provider, about respect, about reputation. All the usual lines men like him hid behind. The tallest biker stepped closer, his boots scuffing the gravel. Not a threat, just presence. Another moved to the side, blocking the man's angle toward the diner. A third adjusted his stance, watching the street for any sign of backup the man might have brought. There was none. He had no one. The man's voice cracked when he shouted again. He tried to step around the first biker, but each time he shifted, another presence quietly closed the gap. He wasn't surrounded in a circle. He was surrounded by truth. The truth of what he'd been. The truth of who he'd become. He swung his arm out, not a punch, not committed, just a wild attempt to regain space. The biker caught the motion before it fully formed, not grabbing, not striking, just stepping into the moment with the kind of certainty that ends things without raising dust. The man froze, inches from impact, breath catching in his throat. No words were traded, no warnings given. The road doesn't argue with men like him. The biker leaned in just enough that the man could hear his voice. Low, steady, final. He told him he wasn't going near the woman again. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever. The man tried to laugh it off, but the sound died before it left his throat. Something in the biker's tone stripped the bravado clean off him. Another rider walked to the man's truck and pulled the keys from the ignition, tossing them onto the passenger seat where the man could see them, but not reach them without going through every biker present. A subtle message. Tonight, he had no vehicle for escape, no path to reclaim power. The man's shoulders caved in. His eyes darted wildly, looking for some small crack in the wall around him. There was none. The biker stepped back once, giving the man the space to leave on foot. A mercy that felt more like a verdict. The man backed away, stumbling as he turned, muttering threats he no longer believed. He walked along the edge of the road, too afraid to run, too ashamed to stand tall. The bikers watched until he disappeared into the dark, swallowed by the very night he thought he controlled. No one cheered. No one spoke. The confrontation ended the way justice sometimes does, quietly, completely. The biker retrieved the lighthouse keychain from where he'd pocketed it earlier, turning it once in his hand as the engines began to rumble back to life. A symbol of someone who'd tried to guide others through storms, someone whose absence left a gap the world had stopped noticing. He closed his fist around it, then slipped it into his jacket. Not to keep, to return when the time was right. The riders mounted their bikes. One by one, engines ignited, steady and calm. The biker was the last to start his, waiting until the others had formed their usual staggered formation on the road. When he finally joined them, the group rolled out slow, leaving nothing behind but the echo of engines fading into the night. The diner's lights glowed faintly in their mirrors before the curve swallowed them whole. The road stretched empty and cold by the time he peeled away from the pack, taking a different turn than the others. He didn't need to speak it aloud. They knew his work wasn't finished. Some stories require a return, not a retreat. He followed the quiet streets until he reached a neighborhood worn thin by years of missed repairs and forgotten people. Porch lights flickered, mailboxes leaned, but one house halfway down the block held a faint glow behind its curtains. A rideshare car was parked outside, same one from the diner. Its engine idled while the driver tapped his phone, waiting. The biker pulled to the curb, shutting off his engine. The driver looked up, startled at first, then easing when the biker didn't move toward him. The house door opened a moment later. The woman stepped out with the boy beside her. Her ribs were wrapped now, a makeshift bandage beneath her sweater. She held a small duffel bag in one hand, the boy's backpack in the other. Her sister appeared behind her, a tired woman with the same eyes but a steadier posture. She didn't ask questions. Family doesn't always need explanations. The boy spotted the biker immediately. He didn't run to him this time. He just lifted his chin in a small, solid acknowledgement. Not fear, not desperation, just a quiet understanding of what had been done for them. The woman stepped onto the porch, holding her side carefully as she descended the steps. She paused halfway, staring at the ground like she was trying to gather strength she didn't know she still had. When she finally looked up, her voice barely carried across the yard. She said she didn't know what would happen tomorrow. She didn't know where they'd end up, but she knew tonight wasn't controlled by fear anymore. The biker didn't respond. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the lighthouse keychain, placing it gently on the porch railing. The woman stared at it, covering her mouth with her hand. The boy touched the keychain like it was a piece of someone he'd lost and found again. The symbol wasn't meant to comfort. It was meant to remind them of something simple. Storms don't last forever. The rideshare driver leaned on the horn softly, signaling it was time to go. The woman nodded toward the biker, not thanking him, just recognizing the code that brought him to them. She guided the boy into the car. Her sister followed, closing the door behind them. The car pulled away, rolling down the street until its taillights shrank to two small dots swallowed by the dark. The biker watched until the night returned to stillness. He mounted his bike, engine rumbling back to life. A porch light flickered behind him, but he didn't turn to look. He rode away slow, letting the cold wind wash off the weight of the evening. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't proud. It was quiet and necessary, carried out by men who didn't ask for credit, who didn't stay to collect gratitude. At the end of the block, he paused at a stop sign, the intersection empty in all directions. He lifted his gaze once, just enough to see the faint glow of the lighthouse keychain swinging gently in the wind where he had left it. Then he rode on, swallowed by the night, another silence restored. What would you have done in his place? Share your thoughts and pass this story on.